Hey everybody, it's Uncle Jon, and I'm here to bring you another chapter from How's Inky by Sam Campbell. Today's chapter is number 5, and it's entitled Home. There's no place like it, as every creature knows. Summer came like some rich, warm spirit that sets all nature yawning, stretching, and sometimes dozing a little. Leaves had spread to their fullest, with their green magic drinking deeply of sunshine, rain, and the nectar of winds. Birds had lost some of their springtime zest, their first families were raised, food was plentiful, and now they had time for leisure. Deer were wearing their red coats, and fawns were now large enough to care for themselves with just a few helpful hints from their mothers. Antlers of the bucks had reached impressive size, but were still covered with the soft skin of growth called the velvet. At night there was the song of the whippoorwill, the strange and useful bird who is really so mild, but is always wanting poor William punished. There were the coarse calls of the great old bullfrogs that sound something like a slide trombone out of repair. And back of all other nocturnal notes was that throbbing of insects which seems to measure the mystery, depth, and antiquity of the forest. On certain nights, when the mood was right, northern lights played in the north sky, their long white fingers reaching upward as if nature were pointing with pride to the stars. And on certain days, when again the mood was proper, great clouds and fantastic forms floated through the blue as though nature were now daydreaming, imagining things. Summer found the 5 orphans maturing rapidly. We could see a day-by-day change in them. They were growing in size, wisdom, beauty, and interest. About them was a great ocean of life. The forest and time had come when they were becoming an important part of it. Now, one of the most compelling laws of nature was tugging at the orphans' hearts. The law of home. How that call of home comes through the land of living things. Whatever knows life must know home, and sometimes the love for home seems even greater than the love of life. Whatever the plant or creature, there is a certain place that suits it best, a place where it feels a measure of abundance, security, comfort, and familiarity. Such a place becomes home. The little cabin given the orphans never really had been home to our 5 little friends. It had been a good place to pass their days of babyhood, and it was a good provision so long as they could not provide for themselves. Certainly they had learned to care for the cabin as well as for the human beings who gave it to them. But now had come another stage in the orphans' growth, and the little cabin no longer fitted. Their hearts yearned for a natural home, a home suited to their normal way of living, their instincts, their dispositions. Home is as individual as the one who lives in it, and our little friends wanted homes that fit, homes that really belonged to them. Therefore, they spent their time exploring, searching first for home. Sausage did not have to go far in her search. She simply dug herself a home right under our cabin, and if it were placed so that it threatened to undermine part of the foundation, that was nothing to her. It was quite a remarkable cave she dug. The main entrance to it was 8 inches in diameter, and there were 2 other entrances smaller than the main one, but usable. Under other buildings, a little distance away, she had dug several additional cave dwellings. Whether these were built for use or just for the love of the work, we could not tell. She was generally in the one under the house, and seemed very proud of her new residence. At times she would play a game of peekaboo with us, peering out until she would catch us looking and then suddenly jerking her head out of sight. She would pretend great fright when we approached, literally diving into her bomb shelter. Yet we could reach in after her and drag her forth unresistingly to have her nestle in our arms and enjoy the petting given her. We were highly curious about the home of Sausage, but we would never do her the injustice of digging it up. Woodchucks make remarkable homes, and I have no doubt that Sausage lived up to the standard. Underground, these busy little creatures construct an amazing network of halls, rooms, and galleries designed with definite purpose and with excellent regard for proper drainage and sanitation. One woodchuck home unearthed revealed tunnels totaling 48 feet in length. The homes generally have 2 or more doors. Sometimes, when Sausage had disappeared into her main entrance, we would call to her, only to discover that she had already come out through some hidden exit and was standing near at hand, watching us, and probably laughing in silent groundhog fashion. Babette chose a quiet woodland valley 1/4 of a mile from our cabin as her home. She loved that little retreat, and we could usually find her there. We saw less and less of her at the sanctuary as the season unfolded, yet during these summer days she would run up to us whenever she saw us in the woods, plainly delighted that we had paid her home a visit. She loved to feed along the slopes of the hills that circled the valley and to lie quietly in the sunshine. Her wilderness friends were there frequently, and it is possible that they all lived in that valley. In the North Country, a little protected spot like that valley becomes very sacred to deer, and it has been hard for human beings to understand the deer's attachment to it. Where snows are so deep, such a valley home becomes a yarding place where a small herd of deer can band together in winter to their mutual advantage in the battle if wolves come upon them. At times, men who work at conservation have been concerned because deer yarding in that manner exhausts the available winter food. Since the deer would not go elsewhere voluntarily, the men have endeavored to take them to other valleys where there was greater food and, they supposed, greater happiness for the deer. Such a move always has been most difficult to carry out and laughably futile. At one place, men worked a number of days, catching deer and crating them in a valley where it seemed that they would starve, and taking them to another valley 8 miles away where there was an abundance of food. At last the deer were liberated in the new home selected for them, and it took them but a few hours to get back to the old valley again. A simple and limited diet in the place they knew as home was preferred to rich living in a strange land. While at first thought we may think animals stupid in their determined devotion to home, in the broadest sense, the instinct does them much good. It keeps their population spread widely and prevents congestion and its many attendant evils. The home of Rack and Ruin remained hidden to us, though we feel that we know what it was, even if we don't know where it was. A hollow tree somewhere in the forest vastness back of the sanctuary, that would be their instinctive selection. Perhaps it was somewhere near Babette's Valley. We hoped so, for we wanted our orphans to retain their friendship with one another, and to a large extent they have. The raccoons were still quite young when they located a much-loved home somewhere. We saw them go into the woods time and again, always by the same route, and though we tried hard to follow them or to track them, we never did find their lair. We felt defeated in that respect, and not a little disappointed. Bobby and I wanted the satisfaction of peering into their secluded mansion, seeing them huddled in a little furry heap and yelling, "Yeah! Thought we wouldn't find you, eh? Well, what do you think now?" But that moment of triumph never came. Inky made no secret of his home. It was just the woods, although he did have preferred nooks and corners. A tall white birch within a few feet of our cabin door seemed to be a favorite, yet if Inky were not in that tree, he might be in the black spruce that grew in the swamp, or in the aspen at the lake shore, or in the red pine on the hilltop, or in the hemlock along the trail, or in any balsam, maple, wild cherry, white pine, or whatnot that was handy. This does not imply any lack of home instinct, however. Inky loved the little part of the earth that was his, and he did not fancy being moved. Once we took him to an island for a short time, and he was plainly discontented and unhappy. When we returned him to the region he knew so well, he went about talking in his happiest manner. More than all the others, though, Inky retained his love of human society. He was never happier than when he could gain admittance to our cabin and be in the family circle. Sometimes he was allowed to remain inside overnight. Sometimes he stayed in without being allowed. So it was the night I found him in my bed and had to use pliers to pull the quills out of the foot that had first discovered him. This staying inside was brought to an abrupt end, however, when he had spent one whole night chewing up my favorite boots, and then, for the sake of variety, biting a few holes in Bobby's hat and in Judge Norton's leather suitcase. We gave our little friends absolute freedom to work out their own salvations in the teeming world about them. What an exciting, adventure-filled life it must have seemed to them, with the great areas and myriad living things. Yet the orphans never forgot us, and a new and deeper sense of our friendship with them dawned. It had been a thrill to hold them in our arms and care for them while they were tiny, but to see wrack and ruin come to us when we were on the trail, to have Babette appear suddenly beside us as we sat on a log, to have Inky call a greeting to us as we passed under a tree, or for Sausage to scratch at the screen door in the middle of the night asking for food, this was joy many times multiplied. In their baby days, the orphans had to accept us. There was no choice. But now they were at liberty. They had their own homes and were independent. Now they came to us because they wanted to. "We are still a part of their home," said Bobby, voicing a happy thought. "They have not left us nor deserted the sanctuary. They have just built new rooms onto their homes. This is a larger way of living that includes the old way." I believe we all gained a clearer sense of what home means as we watched the animals adjust themselves. We noted with new appreciation the infinite variety of homes of creatures all about us. Never before had we realized how much the homes meant to the little things that lived in them. In the top of an old stump at the water's edge was the nest of the home of kingbirds, cleverly made of little sticks, grass, and moss. When we first saw it, there were 5 small eggs, creamy white with reddish-brown dots. How those courageous little parent birds had loved and guarded that home. Let another bird come close, and the kingbirds were a wing to proclaim their rights. No potential enemy was too great for them to tackle. We have watched them drive away crows, ravens, and even eagles. No one is really hurt during this combat. The kingbird is so fast, he darts in and pecks the large bird on the head without the slightest danger of retaliation. The large bird then is very happy to move on. Inky the porcupine tried to climb that stump one day, but the kingbird convinced him that he had better choose another. When in early July the little birds had hatched out, I believe those parent birds would have tackled ostriches or even elephants had they come too close to the nest. Deep in the forest, back of the sanctuary, is a heron rookery, the community homes of scores of great blue herons. These enormous birds, which some people erroneously call cranes, build nests fully as large as a bushel basket and high in good-sized trees. We came upon this rookery while hiking through the woods one day and were amazed at its size. In one tree there were 9 nests, and many trees held 4, 5, or even 6. We had known there must be such a bird village nearby, for in early evening we had often seen several of these great stilted creatures wading along the shallow shores of our lake, feeding on small fish, frogs, crayfish, and the like. Then the herons would rise on wing, looking like great airplanes, and fly into the setting sun. Somewhere out in that direction must be the heron's home, and we knew that there would be many nests, for they do not build singly. But when we found their home, it was much larger than we expected. It extended over several acres of ground, each suitable tree having some nests in it, and each nest was filled with squawking youngsters. There is no word that fits their cry other than squawking. The birds did not know of our approach at first, and so we listened to their normal family conversation. Such a wild and persistent jabbering. It made the cries of our 5 little orphans seem like a soft lullaby by comparison. Strangely, when the sentinel of the rookery, perched high on a tree, discovered us and let out a cry of warning, the tumult suddenly ceased. Every young bird froze in the position he was holding. Some were on limbs of trees, and so still they might easily have been mistaken for dead branches. There was such silence that if we had not known better, we would have concluded that we had come upon a deserted village. And this enforced quiet reigned as long as we were near. One can see here how forcefully the law of home governed the lives of these creatures. This spot they loved, developed, protected. During winter time, they would fly perhaps 1,500 miles to the south, but in spring they would return to that same little spot in the forest, and each day during nesting season, parent birds would fly far and wide in search of good fishing grounds, but each evening they would return to their home. At the crest of a hill on a neighboring lake stands a wildlife home which we often watch in silent admiration. It is the great nest of a bald eagle built at the top of a dead white pine, fully 80 feet from the ground, 90 feet from the ground. For many years, the same pair of birds has occupied this nest, adding to it by way of repairs each season until the mass of good-sized sticks, roots, twigs, vines, bark, and grass is estimated to be 8 feet high. Sometimes we see the birds making great majestic circles about their home, their white heads and tails appearing in sharp contrast against the rich blue of the northern sky. How these magnificent birds love their home, their family, and each other. An eagle mates for life. Eagles never leave their homes for long or to go far. In the far north, they fly away for a period when lakes are frozen over, making food hard to get. But they go no farther than necessary and return at the first thaw. On the lake where the eagles live are other notable homes. In the marshy shallows, muskrats have built their peculiar little houses made of mud mixed with grass. A dozen of them can be seen scattered among the reeds. The houses are built in water about a foot deep, the tops rising about 2 feet above the surface. It is inside these mounds of mud that the muskrats live. The houses have little snug rooms above the water level, and the entrances are long tunnels beginning at the bottom of the lake. On another shore, close to the water's edge, is another home, not unlike that of the muskrat. From a distance, it looks like a pile of brush, but closer examination shows it to be a planned arrangement of many forest materials. Moss, mud, leaves, grasses, sticks, stones, and logs. Here lives the wisest of woodland creatures, the beaver. Within that mound there is a well-constructed, well-ventilated room, and the entrance, like that of the muskrat home, is a long tunnel coming from the lake bottom. How these little fellows carry out this remarkable construction work with no tools but teeth and feet is one of the grandest stories of nature. On a hillside is an overturned tree, its roots now reaching up into the air, leaving a protected hollow beneath. This is the home of a bear, where it has slept through the winter, and not far away is a good-sized hole dug under an old stump, the home of a red fox. Homes, homes, homes. The woods, prairies, lakes, streams, rocks, hills, mountains, valleys are filled with homes, and they are themselves homes. As a law, home is just about as positive as gravity. In fact, it acts a bit like gravity among living things. Home has pulling power and attraction that leads to overcoming great problems and difficulties. There are few who have not learned something of this marvelous instinct in the homing pigeon. Going home is a religion with homing pigeons. While waiting for radio to be discovered, the human race used this little feathered homegoer to carry communications. Let one of the little fellows loose anywhere, and he rises on wing, circles about until he gets his bearings in some unfathomed way, and then straight home he goes. If there's a message tied to his foot, that goes with him. Sometimes these homeward flights are little short of miraculous, such as that of a bird that was taken from New York to a point along the Orinoco River in Venezuela. One day, the door of his coat was left open, and he escaped. A few days later, he showed up at his New York home and was feeding among other pigeons as if nothing had happened. But he had flown at least 2,000 miles to complete his journey. Another bird, during a homeward flight, encountered hunters who shot away most of his feathers, but did not wound him fatally. He couldn't fly, so he walked home. The distance of the walk is unknown, but it is certain that it was over many miles, making necessary the crossing of busy highways, railroads, and flowing streams. But pigeons hold no monopoly on this homing ability. The historical case of the collie dog, who to return to his home made his way alone across the width of America, shows us something more of this instinct. This dog was lost by his owners somewhere in the East. After much searching, they despaired of finding their pet and returned without him to their home in the far West. 2 years later, the dog came to them, thin, tired, and bedraggled, but his tail was wagging, for he had come home. There was a shepherd dog taken from St. Clair, Michigan, to a point 100 miles beyond Aberdeen, South Dakota. He traveled almost all the way to South Dakota in a boxcar, so that he saw little of the country through which he passed. Yearning for his old home, he disappeared one day in October. In August of the following summer, the dog reappeared at his Michigan home. What a glorious epic of heroism, persistence, and devotion is hidden in those intervening months. What difficulties, dangers, hunger, and complicated problems must have been confronted by the creature every hour. No less remarkable is the authenticated story of a Persian cat which was taken from San Diego, California, to Phoenix, Arizona, a distance of 380 miles. He returned to his California home after 14 months of travel, during which he must have crossed a blistering desert and the Colorado River. Innumerable are such stories. Horses, cattle, sheep, birds, and fish have demonstrated this amazing homing ability. Even an old toad has been known to hop 10 miles to return to his favorite garden after he had been carried away in an experiment. Perhaps, when we see this instinct operating so powerfully and universally, we understand why the building, the maintaining, and the defense of homes are so much a part of our own history. The judge asked a question about this. Why then do you suppose have the people of our times come to neglect homes so much? The judge continued, Why, I know fellows who won't go home until there isn't any other place to go. And if they have to stay home for an evening, they figure that they are being punished. This is sadly true. Among other mistakes of our day, we have tried to push home aside, to forget it. But that is not to our credit, and it certainly explains some of the unhappiness in our generation. There are those who say with pride that they cannot stay in, cannot sit down and spend an evening in conversation or reading a book at their own fireside. That is a confession of weakness, and nature will never let us alone in such an error. The same call of home that beckons Rack and Ruin, Sausage, Inky, and Babette to find a spot called home and to live forth from there is speaking to us, and wisdom calls us to respond. It says to us, find yourself a home. Make it the seat of your affections. Respect it. Cultivate it. Appreciate it. For in the spirit of home do you find all that is good and decent in life. Homes build communities. Communities make nations. Nations of home-loving people make civilizations. One evening at the sanctuary, we had an experience which has remained in our memory ever since. In it was represented a true picture of home. It was storming outside, rather cold, and Bobby, Judge Norton, and I were enjoying the ruddy warmth of a crackling grate fire. There was such a happy feeling present, something so substantial and comfortable. We had passed some time reading, talking of various matters, and occasionally singing campfire songs, when there came a scratching at the screen door. Bobby went in response to it, and as he expected, found Inky, wet and cold. The little porky was brought in by the fire, where he grunted forth his gratitude and soon was dozing in the friendly warmth. Then came another scratching, a bit more violent and commanding this time. Bobby responded once more, and there were Rack and Ruin also showing marks of the weather. They too were welcomed, petted, and soon sleeping contentedly at our feet. Within a few moments, we heard the little voice of Bobette at the door. Bobby again played butler, and as he patiently held the door while Bobette took her own time to enter, Sausage came out of the darkness and darted inside. After we had made the conventional fuss over the newcomers, Bobette lay down on a rug, and Sausage crawled into Bobby's pocket, a favorite place of hers. Now there was a scene to remember. 3 men, 2 raccoons, a porcupine, and a woodchuck, and a deer gathered before a great fire. It rather pictured the millennium, the way of life as it is seen when love rules. Out in the forest, the rain was coming down in torrents, the wind whipping the trees, and those storm clouds made the cabin more cozy, the fireside more cheery. The evening was built on wholesomeness, satisfying joy. It wasn't the shouting and hilarity sometimes mistaken for happiness. The very atmosphere was charged with friendship, security, and goodwill. The judge told some of his famous stories, and it seemed to us that they had more flourishes than ever before. Bobby popped some corn over the fireplace coals, and all of us, the 5 orphans included, happily partook. We read some thoughts and descriptions from favorite books. We sang songs again, and thus an evening passed in what was probably the greatest single joy of the wise Creator has provided his creation, hut happiness. Presently we noticed a little nervousness on the part of Bobette. She arose and made her way to the door, looking into the night, alert to something she saw or heard beyond the realm of our dull senses. The door was opened to her, and she went out, no doubt to join her wild friends of the forest. We found now that the rain had ceased, and the forest was dark, dripping, cool, and mysterious. Next, Rack showed restlessness. Something was calling him in tones we could not hear. He trilled a little, in raccoon fashion, and Ruin wakened and came to his side. The door was opened again, and these 2 went out on missions they alone understood. Sausage followed a few moments later, dashing swiftly and silently into her cave under the cabin. Now of our visitors only Inky remained. He still dozed, his nose alarmingly close to the fire. We had not the heart to put him out, and had decided that this might be one of those nights where he would be allowed to remain inside. But he had some ideas of his own about what he should do. He roused, looked about him, shook his quills, and started talking as if asking where everyone had gone. We always referred to this funny conversation as honking, though that is a very poor description. No terms we could find describe the sound very well. It is a sound like that of a human being when he is trying to not say what, why, or huh. Instead, he keeps his lips closed and says, with a rising inflection. Well, Inky does that, and keeps repeating it. It is awkward to say that he is ming, so we say he's honking. Well, Inky came honking to the door and scratched in his original way, asking that it be opened for him. He didn't scratch on the screen directly in front of him as an animal would be expected to do. Inky always reached above his head and in a most clumsy manner and comical way scratched down toward his nose. We hesitated long enough to laugh at his posture and then opened the door for him. "Where are you going, Inky?" asked Judge Norton. "Honk, honk," Inky answered, looking up. "Want to go out and get your feet wet?" Honk, honk, honk. "All right, old fella, you asked for it," and then Inky was ushered through the door. He honked and honked as he went down the steps, disappearing into the darkness. "Inky, are you there?" called Bobby, looking aimlessly into the night. Honk, 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 came the reply from the darkness. By the sound, we could trace his progress to his favorite birch tree, and knew by the same means when he had started to climb. Time and again we called his name. Each time he answered with a honk or two. He must now have been quite near the top, for his voice sounded well overhead. "Guess Inky must have gone home," said the judge. "Honk, honk," Inky assured us. "Good night, Inky." Honk. The joy we had experienced in that evening of fireside companionship and home atmosphere was the subject of much comment as we prepared for bed. The judge was quiet in his room for a few moments and then came out asking for our attention. "See how you like this one," he said. He began patting the floor with his foot to set the rhythm for Turkey in the Straw. We knew another verse was coming, and here it is. "Oh, bars don't make a cage, and a home ain't made by walls. Build a house upon the sand, and pretty soon it falls. But nail some boards together, make a window and a door, fill it full of loved ones, and it's home forevermore." The judge should know. He made a home just that way. And that's the end of chapter number 5. Come back, and Aunt Nikki is going to bring you chapter number 6. See you later.